This video is not to be a contrarian or to be negative about the game. I am just providing my personal opinion that the nerf in the latest PTB is not good for the game, and it just proves my monetization video even further. First of all, let me explain my point of view. The nurse will receive a nerf to her power in that her blink attacks no longer count as basic attacks anymore, and instead they are now special attacks. This nerf was something that the community has been asking for a long while, as the nurse was one of the most powerful users of perks like Know It or the combo Starstroke Agitation, which made her extremely powerful, and in turn this made behavior have to rework and nerf certain perks in order to fit the power of the nurse, with the best examples being I'm All Ears and Awakened Awareness, perks that are nothing special with the majority of characters, but with the nurse they turn into very good perks. My opinion on this nerf is that this was a good change for her. It was unfair that her attacks counted as basic attacks, and meanwhile, characters like the Blight still had their attacks count as special attacks. The inconsistency is still technically in the game, as characters like Spirit or Wraith still have special attacks that count as basic ones, but I think they do not need to have their attacks count as special in my opinion. My main problem with this change is that it accomplishes nothing actually positive for the game overall. Now, let me explain. The only thing that this nerf has accomplished for the nurse is that no longer can they use Know It or the Starstroke Agitation combo, and it also removed a lot of perk synergies, which are Sloppy Butcher, Devour Hope, Franklin's Demise, Knockout, Jolt, Rancor, Hubris, Dragon's Grip, Make Your Choice, Haunted Ground, Iron Maiden, and save the best for last. In other words, nurse mains will simply stop using these perks and move to the others. I have 3 predictions on what will possibly happen to the game after this patch. My first prediction, and most obvious, is that nurse mains will simply use 4 regression perks and start to have extremely long games in order to protect 3 gens. The nurse has insane mobility and she can cover a lot of ground very easily, making even Blight jealous. What was before games that ended extremely fast with slugging are going to be now extremely dragged out matches that will probably last longer than 10 minutes, only to end up dying to the nurse either way. So nurse players will use Call of Brine, Overcharge, Eruption, and maybe Deadlock or Pain Resonance. My second prediction is that nurse mains will start using a pure aura reading build, just like some huntresses do, and will simply have extremely fast chases where survivors have absolutely no counter to. If a nurse knows your exact location while in a chase, there is no counterplay you can do as a survivor. You can only count on the nurse player making a mistake. So nurses will use Lethal Pursuer, Barbecue and Chili, Fluids of Rage, I'm All Ears, and more aura reading perks, and this in turn could cause it so that Distortion and Shadow Step actually become a meta perk in the game. But if this is the case, then those nurse players will stop using aura reading perks and will revert back to a 4 regression perk build. But see, here's the thing. My point is that this nerf does not do much to nurse mains, but what this nerf accomplishes is that it completely killed the nurse in low MMR lobbies, because now nurse players or new players that just started playing the game can no longer rely on Know It in order to get some sacrifices in their bad games as the nurse. In fact, new nurse players no longer have any good perks to use in their builds as new players. If you watched my channel, you probably saw my 50 minutes long video talking about how bad the monetization in this game was. In that video, I showed a DVD forums answer made by Mandy Talks, a community manager that stated that the game is not pay to win because the nurse is a free character and is the strongest character in the game. Of course, Mandy is not the Jesus Christ of behavior, and so her word is not the gospel. However, I doubt that there are many in the community that would disagree with Mandy. In fact, behavior also knows this, because the nurse is the killer with the lowest kill rate in the entire game for all MMR, and they don't buff her in any way, so they understand that the nurse is a very strong killer. Behavior themselves admitted that the nurse is the strongest killer in the game and that there is basically no counterplay for the survivors to do against her in their death diary. So with this in mind, it is clear that Behavior is aware that the nurse is overpowered, a problem, and this also means that people are going to still defend Behavior by saying that since the nurse is a free character, the game is not pay to win. But this patch completely changed that. Now, the nurse is indeed a pay to win character. Since I got a lot of comments attacking the meaning of pay to win instead of what my argument actually is, let me rephrase the word. Now, if you pay for license perks, you are going to win way more than if you don't pay. With this patch, players that do not have any licensed DLC will not have access to perks that are extremely good on the nurse. These perks being, for example, Eruption, Call of Brine, Deadlock, Lethal Pursuer, I'm all ears. In order for you to understand specifically what I mean, I feel I need to make one point very clear regarding the nurse. I firmly stand that the nurse does not require that much skill to do good, contrary to what a lot of killer mains say. Hillbilly or Blight, in my opinion, take way much more skill than the nurse in order to play at the highest skill cap, but if you take a look at the kill rates, you will see that the nurse is the lowest, so that must mean that she is the killer that needs the most skill to play as. However, this is incorrect. The only reason why the nurse will always have a lower kill rate than any other killer in the entire game is simple. The nurse is the only character that forces you to use her power in order to play the match. Hillbilly has an extremely high skill ceiling and takes insane amount of hours to be good at. Curving with Billy is something that I personally still don't know how to do despite having 1000 hours in the game. However, you don't need to curve as a Hillbilly to play as him. Hillbilly is a 115 character in terms of speed, so even at worst, new players can simply give up on the chainsaw and use his power like an M1 killer, just like Wraith or Trapper. With the nurse, that is impossible to do. You have to learn her power and you have to use it to get hits, because she is actually slower than survivors are, and this makes her kill rate to be low, because unlike the majority of the cast, you will get obliterated in your first matches as the nurse if you don't know how to use her power, as you cannot rely on your chasing skills that you learned with the rest of the characters. If you noticed, you will also see that the Trickster is the second killer with the lowest kill rate in the game. Not only is he very weak in the meta in my opinion, but you also need to use his power effectively in order to down a survivor, and Trickster depends a lot on the map in order to do well. In fact, Trickster I think is another killer that requires a lot of skill to learn as a new player, because his power might be very simple to understand, yet it requires a lot of game knowledge to use, especially in console. A new Trickster player that is being chased in the shack can be looped there for 5 generators if they play poorly. Another killer that has the similar problem as Trickster is the Doctor. A lot of new players just spam the power in a loop thinking that is going to help, and thus his kill rate is lower. With this patch, bad nurse players can no longer rely on the best killer perk in low MMR, Noed. This means that the nurse kill rate will absolutely plummet, and possibly players will stop using the nurse because her perk synergies when you're new to the game are absolute trash. The best build for a new player with the nurse currently before the patch is Noed, Sloppy Butcher, Nurse's Calling, and Jolt. This is for a new player that just started to play the game. With this patch, 3 of those perks are obsolete, so now the best build for the nurse might be maybe Nurse's Calling, Fearmonger, Spies from the Shadows, and I don't know, Unrelenting. I mean, the point is that the nurse players no longer have a solid build to play as with being free to the game, and they will lose hard. But guess what, my friend? Nurse players that have already invested $200 in the game, or that already grinded over 100 hours in order to have good builds, well, they can still continue and absolutely decimate the survivors like nothing changed, because the nurse is overpowered. And The worst part is that I know, based on my monetization video, that there are still going to be absolutely delusional people that are going to comment that this is not a problem because you can win without perks. And alright, you know what, I understand, you can win without any perks, that is true, but please tell me that a nurse with any of the two builds I proposed earlier is not stronger than a new nurse player. This is the definition of pay to win. As long as you pay for access for better perks, you are going to win easier or with less skill than if you were just playing normally or didn't have the means to pay for the DLC. I really don't get how you can still defend behavior in any way from this. What do you gain as a player for defending anti-consumer practices? What do you gain from defending a clearly bad monetization problem that can and will affect new players? I seriously do not understand how even with clear facts, people still defend behavior's perk system when I am telling you that it's absolutely flawed by the design of the game. The worst part of all of this still is that behavior will claim that the game is not pay to win because the nurse is free and you don't need perks to win with her. And to which I have to say that I feel something very shady is going on behind the scenes. They know the nurse is overpowered, they know the community hates the nurse, they understand that even killer mains agree the nurse is completely overpowered, yet they still don't nerf her in any drastic way. All they give her is small band-aid fixes that the majority of players in high MMR will simply circumvent by using another broken build. And let me remind you that these people are the same ones that absolutely butchered the Hillbilly by introducing a stupid overheat mechanic and by making the majority of his add-ons a joke. The same company that nerfed Deathslinger's aiming speed because it gave no counterplay to survivors. Yet they are okay with having the strongest killer in the game be the strongest killer in the game for over 5 years now? I don't know. But by this point, I am almost convinced that they are keeping the nurse overpowered because she is their only scapegoat to people not trashing the game as pay to win. And by the way, just a heads up, now if the nurses uses a full aura reading build as a survivor, you're dead whether you want it or not, unless you have distortion. So if you want any chance at surviving a good nurse with aura reading perks, you need a perk that is locked behind a character that you have to grind 70 hours in order to unlock distortion, or you could buy him for an affordable price and get the perk faster and immediately. So in other words, pay in order to unlock a counter to one of the nurse's strongest builds. In other words, this patch is literally a nerf to free-to-play players. Players that paid for all the DLCs will still enjoy the nurse and how strong she is. New players cannot unless they grind an exorbitant amount of time or they pay. So my video about the monetization problem of this game, thanks to this future patch, just became a stronger argument.